The topic that I would like to talk today is the project controlling the cost of a project. So what we have done so far is, so we have laid out the introduction and what these two procedures are: the critical path method, the CPM, or the PERT, which is the program evaluation review technique. CPM is applied where we know for sure the times that are given to us are deterministic, meaning that we know that it's not going to take long, or it's not going to take shorter than the given time. So that's the CPM. Whereas the project PERT depends on that each activity can last, and there is a distribution for each activity. So we know the optimistic time, the most likely the pessimistic time, and based on those, we take the mean or the average time and go through the project and identify the critical path. So from your homework and earlier discussions, you know how to create a network diagram, a precedence network diagram, and go and calculate early start, late start, early finish, late finish times for each activity, then compute the slack on those activities and identify the critical path. So the critical activities are those activities that do not have any slack in them. So in other words, if you don't want the project to go tardy, they have to start and finish the earliest and latest are the same, okay? But whereas for the non-critical activities, you have some slack that is provided in them. So what it means is, if you start an activity based on early start, when the activity is done, if you are subcontracting the work or you borrowed the money, the expenses have to be paid. No one works for free. So that means the payment of that also comes up early. But if you schedule an activity that has a slack towards its latest start time, so that means now compared to early start time, that activity is going to start little later, and hence the payment comes little later. So in other words, if you are borrowing the money from the bank compared to early start to latest start, so there is that the time that is there. So in other words, you can have some savings in terms of the interest payment that you would have paid on that capital that you would have borrowed. So based on scheduling the activity early or late, because the project is going to finish in the same amount of period, okay, whether you start early or late. So that duration is not going to change, okay. But what you could do is, by scheduling the activity late, you can save on the interest payment. But the risk that you run with that is, by scheduling the activity as late as possible, if something goes wrong, the project can go tardy. So if the project goes tardy, then if there is a penalty payment on that, like some of the problems that you did, then you have to pick the penalty payment. So you are trying to save on the interest payment, but you run the risk of paying a penalty, okay? I mean, that's something that you have to weigh, okay, with each other. So the assumption that we make here is, if the project activity lasts for 2 days and if it costs $180,000, then per week cost is going to be $90,000. So that is the assumption that we make here. Let's take an example problem and go through that. Then what I will do is I will come back and do another problem and then assign a homework for you. Let's look at the case of building a house, and these are the different set of activities that you go through. The precedence requirements is given for each one of those activities, and the duration of each activity is also given. Now the next is, all how to do this precedence diagram, compute the early start, late start times, and also the finish, and identify the critical path, which has been identified over here. And against each activity, you know how to list this. So now here, this is a little bit different than how you have done your homework problem in terms of the listing of the activities, the times, I mean. So the S means start, F means finish. The first numbers are the early start, early finish, late start, late finish. So for each activity, we have that information. Next, let's get the weekly cost. So we know what the total cost for each activity is. Divide that by the duration, and that gives you the last column, that is the per week cost for each one of those activities. Okay, next on the spreadsheet, list down the activities, the duration, estimated cost, and the ratio of this column to that column gives us the weekly cost for each one of those activities. So here is the earliest start times based on that. 0, 2, 6, 16 for each one of the activities. I'm not going to go through all these worksheets that I have here, so I'm going to come back and do a problem. It becomes more clearer if there is any ambiguity over here. Let's take activity A. Activity A start time is 0, so that is 0 right there. End of week 1, and also this start of week 2, end of week 2, which is same as start of week 3. Pay close attention to this. So 90,000 in the week 1, it's going to last for 2 weeks, 90,000 there. Activity B, the duration is 4 weeks, weekly cost is $80,000. It's going to start time is at the end of 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, $80,000 at the end of 2 weeks, which is the start of 3rd week. Now you incur $80,000 on a weekly basis for 4 weeks. That is week 3, week 4, then week 5, and week 6. So likewise for activity C, it's going to start time is 6th. That is end of 6 weeks, beginning of the 7th week. So as I said, I am not going to go through each one of them because this is going to last for 44 weeks. Okay, a big spreadsheet. What I want to show you is the late start again for the first few weeks. So for activity A, it is same as what we had earlier. Activity B also same as what we had for earlier. So what it changes is over here in this part is where it changes, and so those are the numbers that you should be looking at. Okay, one is what is the weekly for that week. Okay, that you add that column up. Then the second row of numbers that you see is the cumulative project cost. This is the weekly basis. The second one is the cumulative so far what we have incurred. Okay, so those numbers. Okay, now when you take on the week basis, take the cumulative based on the early start and early finish. This is the kind of graph that you see. So the top one is based on the cumulative project cost based on the early start schedule. The second one is based on the late start schedule. So when you look at it, for the first several weeks, the cumulative project cost is the same. Then the difference begins to show up here. Then that basically now towards the end of the project comes to an end. We have not gone tardy. So the total project cost would remain the same under both. So the savings, if any, would accrue from here. If you borrow the money from the bank, if I do it on early start basis, so I have to pay up early. But now for the same activity, if I schedule late for the same activity, so I would have some savings in the interest payment because I'm borrowing late, then I'm also paying when that activity exactly finishes. Okay, so that is the savings that I would accrue. Then as I said before, the risk that you run, okay, in saving some interest payment over here would be that you are basically flirting with danger over there. That is, if you start late, if something goes wrong, the project can go tardy, then in that case penalty payment would kick in.